There is an amazing paradox in media today. We consume media content more than ever. The news cycle is faster than ever, but journalists are among the lowest paid, high qualified professionals. So, why do young people want to become journalists? I interviewed a wide range of journalists, from those of 40 years of experience to others just beginning.
Kind of stumbled into the profession. I entered it in 1977. CBS had an opening and I was really lucky to get it, and I stayed with them for 40 years.
I've always loved to write. I wrote bad poetry in high school. And my senior year in high school, my mom suggested, well, you love to write, why don't you join the newspaper? And I hadn't ever really thought about it, but I loved it.
Started out my first time in high school. There was a teacher who suggested that I join the high school newspaper. And ever since then, I've always enjoyed writing news.
I saw a group of people who are super passionate about journalism and about writing, and I really just wanted to get involved. It was a happy accident.
Part of the reason that I really love journalism is because it's changed my life for the better. I made my closest friends.
When I was growing up, I noticed a lot of sloppiness in the press, a lot of bias in the press, and a lot of weaknesses in the press, and I really wanted to help change that, because as a young person, you really want to make a difference in the world.
I think my biggest passion is communicating people's stories and sharing people's voices, because so many voices are underrepresented in our society, and I think it's really important to amplify those.
I thought I wanted to be Walter Cronkite. To make a long story short, my advisor told me I had a face for radio. Started working behind the camera rather than in front of it, and as they say, the rest is history.
Long known as the media capital of the world, New York City, at 12%, has the greatest share of all US newsroom employees. That includes reporters, editors, photographers, and videographers in the newspaper, broadcasting, and internet publishing industries. This is more than twice the share living in London and Paris, the other two international media centers in the Western Hemisphere. But this is not to say that New York provides the perfect environment for journalists. Young professionals and experienced journalists are still facing a lot of challenges. The pressure on journalists grows every day, being called the enemy of the people, killed because of their investigations, and censored by political and business leaders. Their job is less and less safe. Even though in 2019, journalist kills are record low for the previous 17 years, political censorship is on the rise.
Turkish journalists are denouncing the arrest of two prominent editors. More than 100 people have demonstrated in favor of free media in Ankara and Istanbul.
The number of journalists imprisoned globally for their work in 2019 remained near record highs, as global leaders virtually eliminated or discredited free media.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we currently face is we live under a presidential administration that constantly touts fake news, which to him means anything that he does not agree with or he does not like.
Such a basic, simple question, and you try and make it sound so bad. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. You know what? You ought to be ashamed.
So I think there's this constant ongoing discussion of what it means to exercise the First Amendment right of freedom of the press and freedom of speech. So it's definitely a challenge to negotiate that.
These are just dishonest, terrible people. I'm telling you that. Terrible people.
President Trump launched yet another attack in his relentless battle against the media. In a related story, a California man was arrested for making violent threats against the Boston Globe. In one of 12 calls to the paper, Robert Chain allegedly said, "You're the enemy of the people. We're going to kill every effing one of you." Who else is being calling media the enemy? President Trump.
I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are.
You know, CNN, fake news, MSNBC, that's really the enemy of the people.
And so I'm worried that as somebody going into journalism, the second I walk into a room and tell people what my job is, the tone will completely change because people are so distrustful of journalists and don't believe that they are doing the work that they're doing in the same way that we believe the work we're doing is because of Trump's radical.
What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say.
I believe we've all heard the president say that the media is the enemy of the people. Nothing could be further from the truth. A democracy or any society needs the media, and the media work hand in hand with the public and with government to inform and educate. One of our biggest recent challenges is to try to dispel the notion that we are the enemy of the people. We are not.
By definition, journalists and media are the main mediators between the government officials and the nation. But times have changed. The perception of the profession and the industry have shifted. 2019 Gallup poll proves that Americans are largely mistrustful of the mass media, as only 41% currently have fair amount of trust in newspapers, television, and radio to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly, while 59% said they just don't trust media. This latest reading represents a 4 percentage point dip since last year and marks the end of improvements in back-to-back years after hitting an all-time low.
I think if you look at the trend the past 10 years, I would say that it's definitely not been the case. If you look at 50 years ago, for example, in America, or 70, 80 years ago, if the president wanted to talk to people, right, he would have to go through the radio, he would go through the television channels, he would go through the newspapers. Nowadays, we have a president who doesn't even use official White House communication channels, right?
He's very friendly to journalists who write good stories about him, like Fox News and Breitbart, some of the others. But he's been calling fake news from day one. He did admit, I remember this interview, Leslie Stahl with him, and I said, "What?" She asked him, why does he do this? And he said, well, in order to demean the press. It's not fake news, but he wants to get the message out there that whatever the press is putting out is wrong, and he can't believe it.
I do feel like when it comes to social media, like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, information is skewed in that it's either completely wrong or it caters to a specific narrative.
Citizen journalism is becoming a much more popular idea, especially as access to Wi-Fi or the internet or a computer or a phone is much more attainable than it used to be maybe like 20 years ago. And as a result, everyone suddenly has something that they want to say and a platform in some capacity to broadcast whatever it is that they want to say, which can especially be dangerous.
Meanwhile, US newsrooms are paying the price for the rise of social media, and journalists' employment has dropped by a quarter since 2008. The number of newspaper newsroom employees dropped by 15%, while there was no significant change in digital native newsroom employees. But 2018 changed everything. At least 23% of the highest traffic digital native news outlets experienced layoffs between 2017 and 2018.
Probably the biggest challenge is financial stability. As we all know, journalism and writing in general is really difficult in terms of making sure that you're getting paid what you should be getting paid. This year, as well as 2019, has been really bad for journalists and writers because of media layoffs. So there has been a lot of people losing their jobs.
Newsroom employees are more than twice as likely as other US workers to be college graduates. but they tend to make less money than college-educated workers in other industries, according to a Pew Research Center analysis of US Census Bureau data. Nearly 8 in 10 newsroom employees have at least a college degree. In comparison, among employees in all other occupations and industries, only about a third have graduated from college.
It is daunting, I won't lie. It is kind of a concern of mine that there won't be a lot of space left for people like me who are just graduated, and so it is definitely a concern. I guess what keeps me going is just I love the news.
See, journalism to me is fine. There's not any issues with it. It's the business model that's broken.
It's very difficult to flourish under that sort of environment. But the alternative sort of environment where journalism pays for itself, where journalism exists as a private company, is struggling so hard to exist with the rise of the internet and the rise, of things like piracy. The music industry has struggled so much, and now you can see the same thing happening with journalism. I think we're seeing a huge crisis in journalism across the world where small newspapers, small television stations are struggling to stay profitable. When so many newspapers and television stations across America have to close because they lack funding, even giants like the Associated Press are struggling. If you're not the New York Times nowadays, who's really making money in journalism?
The industry was in free fall before COVID, and now it's even more so because just nobody has any money. The advertisers are pulling out, and nobody has figured out yet how to, they call it monetize the news, right? So everybody, so many Americans and people around the world think that they should get their news for free. They're reluctant to subscribe to a newspaper or whatever, but we don't do journalism for free.
I really hope that people start to realize that journalists are the ones doing important work right now because they're giving the truth to the people. And without the work of journalists at this time, during this pandemic, we would have no idea what's going on. So I do hope that after this pandemic and people using a lot of journalists' work to kind of inform themselves, they'll begin to appreciate it more.
Despite the censorship, the loss of trust, and the shrinking media markets, young journalists enter the field, fight for the values of the profession, serve their societies, and hope for the best.
I believe that journalism is as important now as it's ever been. People need the truth. They are desperately seeking the truth. And when we can inform and educate the public, I believe it's reassuring for people to hear the truth.
I think I really want journalism students to recognize that journalism is a social service, that it's like being a nurse or a teacher, that you are never going to get paid a lot of money to be a journalist. What you're doing is helping democracy work. Your job is to tell the stories of people and events as best you can, as accurately as you can, as quickly as you can.
Facing all the challenges of the future, young journalists enter the field, fight for the truth, and would do well to remember the words of Henry Grunwald, editor-in-chief at Time magazine. Journalism can never be silent. That is its greatest virtue and its greatest fault. It must speak and speak immediately, while the echoes of wonder, the claims of triumph, and the signs of horror are still in the air. This is Olga Uzunova reporting from New York. Thank you for watching.